Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. For our listeners today, really, really pleased to have with us a new guest, Mark Hart from MJ Solution Consulting. Mark, can you please tell us a little bit about you and your business?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me, Russell. I've been really looking forward to this. So, hi there, everyone. My name is Mark Hart. I've been navigating the world of tax, accounting, and technology for over 25 years now. I started my career at age 18
Wow.
at Arthur Anderson, who decides to become an accountant at that age, I'm not sure. But then moved on to Deloitte, where I had my tax and accounting stripes
Yep.
before moving over to a head office role in corporate taxes and tax reporting at FTSE 20 Utility. I think it was there that I discovered, or more accurately, I suppose, confirmed my true passion of tax technology. And that led me to a decade career at a tax technology provider. If we fast forward today, I've taken the leap to co-found MJ Solution Consulting. We're primarily a tax technology consulting and implementation business, but we have expanded to data, robotic process automation, other known as RPA. Generally stepping outside of the boundaries of tax and accounting, but we're firmly focused on tax.
Nice, yes, and we'll get into quite a few of those topics today, and really good to have you. And I think it's always, I started my career at Deloitte. Quite a few people I know around the world. Tax technology it's an expanding but still quite a small group of people when you think about it from a UK point of view. And it's one of those things where, typical conversation over a beer is, okay, who do you know? Okay, I know them. Oh, yeah, what about them? And then it turns out that you've worked with dozens and dozens of the same people over the years. So it's good to have another Deloitte alumni.
It's a very small world.
We'll get into some of the technology as we go through, but I suppose you've started your own thing. I suppose firstly, why? Be interesting to understand a little bit about that journey and where you've gone from big corporate to, starting on your own, and also what's kind of driven you to get there, but also what do you do on a day-to-day basis? What does a Monday to Friday look like?
What do I do? Wow. Let me start with the why. So I think starting my own business has always been on my to-do list. I think it's probably on the to-do list of many. 25 years in a large organization, and I did find myself wanting to be a bit more nimble and agile, which really does come with a smaller setup. And I think that's an agility you can pass on to your customers as well in terms of more responsive service. So what better way to achieve that than taking the reins myself?
Hmm.
In terms of a typical day, I'll throw in the analogy of wearing many hats.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could throw that out. I think navigating the day-to-day of a small business really feels like juggling an entire collection. We're in growth phase at the moment. We're in year 2. So a good chunk of my week is still very much spent on business development, social media outreach, talking to clients and partners at conferences, networking events, and trying to secure those all-important one-to-one meetings. I think a lot of time is also spent keeping up to speed and broadening our knowledge with the latest solutions. And Russell, better than anyone, the movement of technology at the moment is at absolute lightning pace.
Just a little bit. Yes.
So keeping on top of that is critical, but also hugely time consuming.
Yeah, I can imagine, and I think it's been interesting because I think you work on, there's a variety of things, and we'll talk a bit more about them, but I've always worked on the building the software side, which is always one of two parts of the solution. There's the software, but the world that we live in, there's nearly always some form of implementation, be that quite light touch and a little bit of training and off you go, through to months, years. I remember again back to the Deloitte days, projects that would span years, in fact, and those are kind of part and parcel of how tax technology plays out. So I guess, having worked on some of those, what do you now bring that's maybe a little bit different? So, you've got these 25 years of experience and various implementations along the way. What does that mean if somebody wants to work with you guys? How does it look?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've worked on a variety of projects, and we're of course always looking for more as we build out, but they vary significantly in terms of duration and scope. We've undertaken projects that are a few days, maybe a week, to some that take several months. We've recently finished a tax provision implementation, which it did actually start with us just being involved for a couple of weeks, but ended up expanding out to multiple months as I guess they got comfortable with working with us, and understandably so. We're a new business and we're still building people's confidence in ourselves. But that was a great project, hugely demanding, crazy hours, because we were working across 4 different time zones.
Nice.
And working across lots of different users in the group tax team. So absolutely awesome. On the other scale, we have projects that are a couple of days. We've done an RPA, again, a robotic process automation implementation for a client. And that took out 3 months of work for them initially and has saved them 2 days a week going forward.
Nice.
Apparently, the excitement at board level is fever pitch, to quote them. So, and all these are great. But, I love, you mentioned, these very long projects. And of course, I've been involved in those, but I really love those smaller projects. And your question about what do we bring there? I mean, I think that ability for us to scale up and scale down to work in projects of all different sizes allows our customers to be more tactical in their approach. I think that's what really sets us apart, actually, is our ability to help them do that.
And do you have how do you approach it? Obviously, if somebody wants to bring you guys in and that's all good, you'll happily do that. But there are clearly with any of these things, there's low hanging fruit, and then things you can pick off relatively easily in maybe a week, versus things that would take much longer. How do you kind of work with customers to make sure they're getting good bang for their buck, but also, I guess, doing interesting work at the same time? How do you balance that?
Yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time in making sure that customers understand what they're implementing, and making sure that they do produce an ROI that's the best ROI they can, and more importantly, I think delivering that project quickly so they see some bang for their buck early on. I think everyone loves a big project, but when you see the value of that 3 years down the line, I'm not sure the finance team will love it so much.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I mean, but ultimately, the client, drives that decision, and it's really all about us helping them deliver the value as quickly as possible.
Nice. And if I was, let's say I was an in-house tax person and I'm considering or about to start a project, be it small, be it big, or anywhere in between, what would be, given your experience and what you've seen over the years, what would be your have you got any pearls of wisdom, any kind of top tips that people can think about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes back to the comment you just made, actually, about driving ROI. I think if you're maybe two different areas, if you're contemplating a tax technology project, my advice, which I outlined actually in a recent LinkedIn article, it really revolves around the power of starting fast and small. And, the focus is really on achieving incremental gains. And maybe I'll unpack that a bit. The starting fast, it's often said that if you can achieve 1% incremental gains per day, that compounds to an astonishing 37-fold increase over a year. And that's just, basic maths. Or relatively complex maths, depending on where your math skills are. What's often not talked about, though, is the impact of delaying that small improvement. And, if you take that maths puzzle again and you delay starting that 1% by just a month, you're bringing that 37-fold increase down to 27. So you're effectively missing out on a whole quarter of the benefits. And that's not a loss you ever recover from. So I think starting fast is really, really important. And equally, I think starting small has its advantages too. If you just consider 15 minutes, if you can save 15 minutes on every of 500 tax computations that you prepare, and yeah, 500 is quite a lot, that frees up a month's worth of time per year. And you think about the additional value you can bring to your organization with that extra month, or with just a minor improvement. So, I think it's far easier to grab the small improvements, that low hanging fruit, and things like, data tools, sorry to say again, RPA. I think all those are brilliant at helping secure incremental gains with very little upfront cost. And if I could just throw in one, because I probably see this more than anything, I think it's really important to not overcomplicate your project.
Yeah.
You buy a solution for a reason, and then lots of organizations try and force their own process into that technology. That really does completely overlook a lot of the benefits of technology. So I would really encourage organizations to really think about the benefits of bringing that technology in, and refresh their process in order to get the best out of that technology.
Nice. No, and I think it resonates a lot, because I think, again, I've only been in the tax technology game for 15 years, and with, I guess, similar but different experience in terms of building products. And I think the mistake that I've often seen made, and I've made it myself, is you end up building quite a lot, and then you You think, oh, I know all about this. We're going to do that. We're going to do this thing, and then you spend a couple of months and do this thing, and then you go up and you shout to a customer, and they go, yeah, but that doesn't work because you wouldn't have the data then, and you need it here, and then you kind of sit in a room and go, well, that's the last 2 months gone in the bin, and that is something that happens, I think, all the time. I think having moved away from that, there's a little bit of that kind of, I guess, product mindset of in your world of starting fast, in my world of just building what we would call an MVP, so getting something really quick out there that just shows the value, right? And that always, I think, means that you get to a demonstrable benefit early doors. I think, when we were looking at AlphaMap just last year, it only took us about 2 to 3 weeks to really test out that theory and prove it. Now, obviously, that was the very, very first kind of nebulous idea, and we've then had to take that and build it and actually productionize it. And that's a whole different thing, right? That's one person proving out a theory in a darkened basement over a couple of weeks is one thing. Turning it into something that people can use in their day jobs is very much a different thing. But it's interesting to hear you say that it's actually just getting your bum on a seat and going, right, okay, today we're going to just crack this particular small problem to show. That's quite an interesting thing. I probably hadn't thought of that in terms of your project work. But is that, what would a kickoff meeting look like in one of your projects? You're just sitting down and going, right, give us a problem, let's solve it. Is that kind of how you work, or is it a bit different to that? Or
Yeah, no, I think that comes pre-kickoff. But I mean, absolutely. I mean, they are the dream meeting, sitting down and saying to someone, give us your problems, and just finding one to start with. And actually, a lot of the work that we've done that's repeat work, and the fact we're on year 2 and we've got repeat work already, I think is great. We're very excited by that. That all comes from just saying, look, just do something, just get something started. We'll pick something that's really small that proves out the value. And sorry to keep coming back to RPA. It's not overly popular in the tax world, but maybe it should be. But RPA is a great example of just pick a small process and automate it. And then once you get used to seeing that bot doing what you expect it to, then you start to build internal use cases and you start to gain more value. And I guess that's exactly how Excel started off, didn't it? I mean, it started off by trying to solve a problem, and then suddenly you find all these other problems that can be solved by Excel. Maybe I can come back to something else you said a second ago, which is tax provision is where we do a lot of work. And tax provisioning is a great example of implementing a tool, and then the customer turns around to you and says, we need this report.
Yep.
And you say to them, okay, why? Oh, well, the auditors asked for it. Great. When was the last time they asked for it? Well, they asked for it 3 years ago, but we produce it now every year, just in case they ask for it again. And these things build up over time.
Yeah.
So that's the bit really about not overcomplicating, is really look at what you need. And you'll be surprised when you have those open conversations with the auditors that they will come along on the journey, particularly now that they're trusting a dedicated tool rather than an Excel-based calculation.
And that's interesting, actually, because that just makes me think of something I saw just yesterday, actually, on LinkedIn. Because as you know, there's as many, different BI platforms now that Power BI and Tableau and all sorts of reporting visualization type tools. And there was a startup, and their whole premise actually was quite interesting, was that everybody's got way too much of this stuff. You've got this different tool in finance, another one in tax, another one in HR, another one in wherever, and they all just build reports, but they build a report and they're really excited about that report for a month, and then they just don't look at it. So their whole premise of their whole tool, which I thought was very interesting, was you can have a maximum of 10 dashboards, 10 reports, no more. And if you wanted to put one in, you had to take one out. And I thought that was actually quite a cool way of looking at things, to basically say, look, guys, reporting is an area that is always up the top of people's list, but also having 500 reports is about as useful as having 5.
Agreed.
And
it's so important for key person dependency to ensure that you've got almost the bare bones is the wrong term, but the what you need and no more, because that comes at a cost. Every report that you run and you maintain comes at a cost to your business.
Yep.
And given, we're all a bit resource constrained, that cost is high.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm a big proponent of, I've seen as many different types of tax product with various reports and there's always a world map. Everyone loves a world map. Log in, see the world map, and I'm going to drill into, where my exposures are on blah, 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 blah. There's always there. I always think, and maybe I'm wrong. I'm happy to be wrong. I'd love to be wrong. That's just something that demos really well and never gets used in practice. Maybe that's the cynic in me, but we love a world map. And then we're going to probably combine two things now. One, me being a cynic, and another one, RPA. And you talked about it quite a bit, and it's actually not something we've talked about a lot on the podcast, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to get you in, because I think you have lots more experience in this world than I do. I always remember really soon after I joined Tax Systems, one of the senior people at the time said to me, because I said, well, I've seen lots of things going on in this industry with all the common tools. All Tricks, I think, is a common tool, of course. And I said, there's a lot going on in that space. Maybe we should have a look. And he said, well, I've spoken to a head of tax, and what he's told me is that RPA just takes all of my rubbish broken Excel processes and makes them wrong quicker. And that was his worldview, and not necessarily one I hold. But it would be good to get your view on that. Is RPA just implementing bad processes and making them quicker? Is it just sort of tinkering around the edges? Obviously, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd hope we don't do any projects where we're just taking bad processes and automating them, but I guess there's something to be said for that. I mean, RPA ultimately, and I've said it a few times, but just in case, robotic process automation. So, computer-based bots that are running software on your machine and doing what you would ordinarily do manually. I mean, it will do what you tell it to do over and over again without fail. And I think that's one of its real strengths. It doesn't make mistakes. It doesn't take lunch. It doesn't quit on you. It doesn't fall asleep. In fact, it does do the same thing time in, time out. Equally, it will do the wrong thing time in, time out. And, that's the critical part, is really understanding your process, really ensuring that you implement it well. I guess most critically, coming back to it, don't overcomplicate it. If you can simplify your process, then it's perfect for automation. And most importantly, not everything should be automated. There are processes that it just doesn't make sense. So yeah, no, I think there's certainly some truth in that, but hopefully, you focus on the processes that should be rather than the ones that shouldn't.
And if you go in and see a process that to you, with your experience, looks broken, is it a conversation around fixing the process before applying automation?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, again, I think that comes to technology generally. We're trying to improve the process. We're trying to simplify it. We're trying to ensure that we're not creating things we don't need to create, because I think the best process is a simple one. And it comes back to that key person dependency again. The more complicated your project, the more complicated your process, the more likely it is that over time people are going to pick it up and go, what's this all about? And we've all been there with Excel documents.
Yeah, and I think, and that's the interesting part to me, is that we still do come across them, and I'm sure you do as well. Before RPA was Excel and VBA, so I still pick up a spreadsheet. Oh yeah, we run this macro every month. It produces this thing, and no one's touched the VBA for that for 20 years, and nobody would dare touch the VBA for that. And there's probably a big user manual that says, "Do not touch this. Just press the button," and out pops the answer. And then RPA came in and has obviously replaced a lot of that, with good reason, right? Because to understand how to write VBA takes time. You have to have a certain kind of skill set, and then for somebody to come and pick that up can be quite tricky. Whereas with RPA, it's all very, there's a user interface to be trained on how to use these things. It doesn't take months and a certain type of person. So I think RPA has superseded that in a lot of ways. But I think we're 20-ish minutes into the podcast without me really mentioning generative AI, which is which is rare, given that we've had entire podcasts on it. But I suppose, how is that? Are you seeing that affecting this world yet? Is it something that you played around with? Is it something that your customers are playing around with? How is generative AI coming into this space, if at all? And then I suppose after that, if it's not to do with, automating processes, where are you seeing generative AI playing a role?
Yeah, that's a great question. And needless to say, I was waiting for the question based on your previous podcast. I mean, I personally use Gen AI on a daily basis. For one, I'm still in business development mode, and nothing gets a conversation started better than bringing up AI. Everyone loves that conversation. I think, secondly, leveraged in the right way, it can be hugely efficient as a sidekick. I mean, whether it's generating a picture for a social media post, getting some out the box ideas, finding an error, writing some basic code. And you mentioned VBA. RPA still uses VBA, so it's a brilliant way to quickly write code. It makes me efficient in what I do, and that it gets passed on to the customer. So I use it on a very regular basis. In a traditional tax context, I don't see it coming up that often still. And I think while those involved in tech talk about AI a lot, I think those that aren't still are getting to grips with what it really is. And it has enormous potential, particularly in tax, for things like the written word around tax, analyzing cases. You've got a great example, which we'll come on to, but it's not so great with numbers. And you noted that in a previous podcast. So things like your Alpha Map tool, the way it handles data, I think that's a perfect use case. But the challenge with AI still is it's forgetful. it hallucinates. And so maybe it's more human than we realize. Um, but I still think, when you go onto let's not name the products, but when you go onto an AI, that is the thing you'll be challenged with.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good chance for me to mention something that I struggle with or fear around AI, which is it has the potential, and it's huge potential, to absolutely change the landscape for upcoming generations of tax professionals. And there is a bit of a risk that they will never manually prepare a tax computation or a set of statutory accounts.
Yeah.
And, we deal with statutory accounts as well. And that could be viewed as progress, but I think it does present a challenge. How do you train future reviewers and advisors if they lack that foundational experience of
Yeah.
never having prepared a tax return? Like, I remember my first day of training, Arthur Anderson made us prepare one by hand.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it was fun, but it was valuable.
Yeah.
And so I think that, the question is really, how do we adapt training methods to make sure we maintain that depth of understanding in professions increasingly influenced by AI? And it's not just tax, it's legal, it's all those, the professions.
Mm.
But I think that's a real, something that I know the ICAEW are thinking about, but it's a real concern of mine in the back of my mind that will become increasingly a problem for the profession.
Yeah, and I think the terminology, and it's a question I've been asked a lot of times, and I think it's one that particularly the big accountancy firms are grappling with, because obviously they've got tens, if not hundreds, of people coming through their ranks every year. Is actually called Microsoft Copilot. It's literally called Copilot. Now, in a world where you've got lots of co-pilots, who's training the pilots? Because traditionally
Exactly.
the co-pilots were becoming the future pilots. Now we're saying you've got this permanent co-pilot that's there. One of the interesting things I was watching just yesterday, there's a man called Benedict Evans who's kind of an analyst and does a variety of things in AI and others. He was saying that he viewed it slightly differently, that you've got all of these, you've got this idea of the co-pilot, or you've got the idea of the kind of, vaguely trained graduate. He said it's not that. Actually, view it as a bunch of infinitely available interns. So if you've got a call center and you're getting 1 million calls a day, you could not hire enough interns currently to listen to every single call and say, oh, it sounded in that one like, the customer was angry, or it actually sounded like the call handler was a bit unprofessional. Now, AI can do a really good job. It can listen to absolutely everything, and it can index things, and it can understand, and it can then produce very, very, very useful data. But what you're not therefore doing is taking them out of that box and saying, well, actually, we want these infinite interns to make decisions. You're just asking them to do a job and produce an answer. And I think, it comes back to the point about maths. They are bad at maths. And I think one of the slides, actually, so we're recording this on the first day of the Digital Accountancy Show this year. I'm talking on day 2, I believe. Hopefully I'll be seeing Mark and some of his colleagues tomorrow as well, so we can catch up over a cup of coffee. But there's something, and I think it's hopefully quite a nice visual in presenting, where there are tasks that are really well made for large language models. They're tasks that they happen a lot. There's no point using a large language model to do something you only need to do once. Why would you build a product around that? So they're highly repeatable, but they're also easy to spot any errors, or the errors are quite immaterial. So a good example in our world, we see in a trial balance, we see something like, I don't know, production costs, and how does that get mapped? It can get mapped to one of 2 or 3 things, and actually that's generally going to be okay. We know the world of tax is not entirely black and white, and there's lots of different potential answers for the one input question. But I think so. Back to the Digital Accountancy Show. So hopefully we'll see you and your colleagues tomorrow. But that's one of the
Sounds
things
good.
that I think that people need to think about. Large language models cannot solve every problem, nor should they be deployed to solve every problem. And in fact, actually, I think there's always a bit of a danger that people can go too far too quickly. There are definitely areas I would avoid, and I've seen some people attempting to get there, and I just don't think it's a good start point. I think we're still very much in the world of low-hanging fruit when it comes to large language models, and there's a lot of use cases that can get picked off. In the same way that, if you're talking about doing a week's worth of work to save people 2 days a month and 3 months up front, then that's great, the ROI, and that's incredible. I think we're still very much in that space where there's lots of good ROI to go after before we try and solve the world
I
using this
agree.
technology.
And we're super early in AI. And you mentioned, large language models. I mean, that's essentially a predictor of what word should I put next after the word I've just written. I mean, that's broadly how large language models work. But I think, if you expand out of large language models and just think AI, I mean, it has the potential of being the best tax advisor, the best driver, if you're talking about a Tesla car, the best teacher. I mean, that is a wonderful world to be in, where AI always presents the best. We're just not there yet.
No.
And AI is terrible at numbers, but you can insert, if we go back to RPA, or if you use a version of AI that we will leave nameless, you can insert Python code into that
Yeah.
and you can get it to run Python code. So there are ways around that, but we are so early on the AI journey. I think the future is bright. But to the point that we made earlier, the real challenge is how do you review a tax computation? How do you review a contract if you're in the legal world if you've never prepared one? I think
Yeah.
that's the real challenge.
No, absolutely. And I think on to, I guess, the last question, nice broad question, moving on from AI, although maybe your answer will involve it, who knows. But I guess, what are your predictions for the next couple of years? Obviously, you're in year 2 of your business. So I guess predictions both for, the kind of work that you guys will be doing, but also what you think's gonna come out the ether. What's in your head?
Yeah, can I go really out there with
Yeah.
that answer
Oh,
if you don't
absolutely.
mind? What we're going to be doing, I mean, we'll follow the market. There's a reason why we're learning AI. It's the reason why we're learning all these tools. Is we see it as really, really important that we're always on the cutting edge of what's possible. So the future of tax tech, from my vantage point, is incredibly fascinating and broad, and it extends into emerging tech. And we've talked about AI, but I'll maybe expand that out a little bit. I think generally there's a tendency to underestimate the impact of technology in the short term,
Hmm.
despite our annoyance that we're not all, zipping around on Back to the Future hoverboards, which of course we're all still waiting for. In the immediate future, I see, an acceleration in real-time reporting across all tax domains.
Yeah.
The UK, for instance, is already experimenting, and I think we could really call it experimenting
Yeah.
with making tax digital. But if you compare that to global mandates out there, in terms of e-invoicing, we're on the slower side of adoption.
Yeah.
So I think global tax technology over the next few years is really going to have to adapt to, and in some way, mold itself around the idea of real-time reporting across taxes. And tax departments are going to need to become more experts in their data. That's the kind of, as governments get more and more data on our companies, we're going to have to get a better handle of that data as it feeds real time.
Yeah.
I think that's the less out there idea.
Hmm.
If I can go to out, quite out there ideas, I think tax ultimately follows business.
Yep.
And I think one of the greatest, changes to tax technology is therefore going to come from the way that businesses adapt. And here's 2 examples, one less crazy than the other.
Hmm.
I think, a game changer for global real-time reporting and the instant collection of taxes, which is the nirvana, could be blockchain technology.
Hmm.
And I can almost feel the groans out there as they hear, blockchain. But despite its mixed reputation, when you strip it down, in essence, it's cryptographically secured public accounting ledgers. And if you put it in that way, I don't think that sounds so crazy, apart from the idea of it being public's quite scary. But if you consider our current acceptance of cryptographically secured public databases, other known as the internet, we're all pretty comfortable with that idea. And so while I think governments are not promoting blockchain, there is evidence that they're trialing it.
Hmm.
They're looking at central bank digital currencies, and, banks are using it internally. So I think there's going to be huge benefits for governments to look at moving things onto blockchain rails and reducing the tax gap. I think the out there, and this is possibly really out there, is that the challenge is going to really come with the future of emerging tech. Governments are still trying to grapple with the taxation of decade-old technology, the
Yeah.
internet, like that. I mean, the BEPS initiative,
Hmm.
in part, is all about the digital economy, which is broadly the internet. And we're still trying to get our heads around that, despite the fact it's been around a very long time. Imagine the convergence of, globally based shared cloud computing, the rise of AI, and the automation of payments beyond government control through blockchain. I think that presents a really intriguing scenario for tax, because imagine a world where AI creates and operates businesses autonomously. Imagine a decentralized Uber, or we could call it Duber. It could go and it could buy Elon Musk's fully driverless cars, and it could manage those. It could handle all its transactions through a decentralized blockchain system. It could manage and own all of aspects of that business through a decentralized cloud system that it would be impossible to determine what country that decision is being made. And, I start to think, well, how do you determine the taxing rights on that when the entity is not identifiable? It's not a person. It's not owned by anyone. It happens everywhere instantaneously. And I think that's going to be an interesting problem for our transfer pricing colleagues
Hmm.
over time. But, I think governments are going to really struggle to grapple with that and figure out how to efficiently tax those.
Yeah.
And, hopefully it doesn't sound too far-fetched, but
It's a bit far
Some
fetched,
may
but that's
say.
why we're here. And I think to be fair, and you mentioned it just at the end there, I was thinking about with transfer pricing, and it's not quite the same, but it's interesting that transfer pricing, there are different facets and lots of things that happen in that world, but one of those is around documentation, as in producing all your documentation, and those documents can run into the hundreds of pages. Now, in a world where AI is quite good at producing lengthy documents, and I think, we had Ian Pay on the podcast from ICAW, who likes to have the analogy of where someone's got some bullet points and they get it to turn it into a big long script, and then someone on the other side gets the big long script and gets it turned into bullet points. So I'll give Ian the credit for that. But is that also going to happen in a lot of transfer pricing? Are people going to build out these 100-page long documents using largely AI, and then on the other side, rather than reading them, someone's just going to say, here's a 100-page long document, give me the 1,000-word summary? So could that be a world where actually some of the technology that we've got in place today changes actually how that stuff is reported for the better? Would transfer pricing documents actually be better if they were 10 pages long and bullet points? Who knows?
Or just a few diagrams.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe.
So
Yeah.
there's lots of different ways this could go. And I would love to sit here and pontificate about the potential future, and no doubt we will do next time we meet up for a coffee or a beer. But
Sounds good.
I think that's all we've had time for. Thank you very much, Mark, for the insights today. Really, really fascinating. And we'll put your details alongside the podcast should anybody wish to get in touch. But thank you very much, and we will speak soon.
Thanks for having me. It's been great fun.